Ciao a tutti! Welcome to Engines of Creation podcast. I'm your host, Christian Mastrodonato. In this podcast, I bring together my knowledge in complex systems with my experience in managing technological innovation and new product development to explore how successful products, organizations, and ideas emerge. For the second episode of the podcast, we're going to meet a very special person, Sudha Jamthe. As you will hear from her own introduction, she's a true innovator, and she's an inspiration for me as a true leader who appreciates and embraces complexity. In particular, with her passion for communicating complex business and technology topics in engaging and effective ways. We're going to discover with her what are the patterns that enable innovation and how a data-driven approach can unlock the creation of innovative products. Also, we will be diving into artificial intelligence, understanding its adoption trends and challenges, in particular taking into account the business skills and ethical concerns surrounding it. And finally, we'll understand with her how the ability to embrace uncertainty by feeling uncomfortable and by being vulnerable are the superpowers to be a modern leader. To be fully transparent, this interview has been recorded a couple of years ago, but it took me some time to bring this podcast to you. Nonetheless, I believe the content of this conversation is still very relevant, and I'm happy to share it with you all. So, let's go! Welcome everybody, and in particular, welcome to Sudha here today. So thanks a lot for joining Engines of Creation podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. This is exciting.
Thanks a lot for being here. And I'm really excited to have you here. I mean, we were talking in the preparation of this podcast exactly about that you are representing really what a modern leader that should understand how complexity works. And I really truly believe you're a perfect example of such a modern leader. But I think probably makes sense before we go into have a deeper conversation, if you could spend a little bit of time introducing yourself.
I'm Sudha Jamthe, and Jane, my name is not silent, and I'm joining here from Silicon Valley. I'm a technology futurist, and I have spent 20 plus years in technology industry in various different kind of roles, bringing new technology and creating new organizations to make that happen. So early on, when the web was picking up, I have brought in web divisions and created business units and made it profitable. And later on, with social media, I brought social media as a org in PayPal, social analytics as a whole new org in eBay, and in my last corporate job, I created mobile analytics, which was a $27 billion business. And each time, I make sure that I build the right people and develop the right leaders so they can run with it as I move on to the next challenge. And then now in the last 5-6 years, I've written 6 books, I think, about IoT, artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, focusing on innovation. And I have this thing, a new venture called Business School of AI, which is my online learning community of business learners who want to make sense of innovation, but do that as a career pivot in their jobs or in new jobs. These are the foot soldiers. Like me, like I brought in innovation to different companies who are doing it in their companies, but as part of their job and career. And it's a learning community called Business School of AI. And we have courses and online learning speakers and support. And we analyze the latest ecosystem and learn together in an online setting specifically about autonomous vehicles and artificial intelligence, how to bring that innovation to your company, to your career.
Well, it's really a lot of things. And in a way, personally, my experience, at least having known you for a while, I mean, there are even things I'm forgetting. You have your YouTube channel. So suggest people to check out, let's say, all the resources that are available online and read your books, because I think there are a lot of interesting things there, especially from your personal point of view and your vision. And definitely, I will touch later on the business and AI, because I think definitely there'll be enough to discuss. But I'm really interested. I mean, your background is really relevant for the ethos of this podcast. And I think, as you mentioned, it's really interesting is when you build things, the reality is that you want to bring the right people together and let them sort of grow and make these things happen. And this is an art and a science. And I think it's really about what I believe is managing complexity. And that's what a real modern leader should do. Were you aware you are managing complexity way when you're doing all these cool things?
Initially, I had this whole identity saying, I came from technology and I was talking about building business. So I always had this thing that I am trying to make sense of business. And I thought that was complex. So I understood it was complex, but I did not think it was a generic complexity. I just thought I did not know this. And so I'm learning that. So when the next wave of technology came, I went through the same thing. And I thought for the longest time that I'm very good at being on the edge of learning, to be in that place where I feel like I don't know something. I did a startup once in all this. I worked in big companies most of the time, but one round of it was a startup in mobile space, pre-iPhone, pre-Android. Not going to talk about that. I used to keep a notebook saying, now I know what I don't know. And I used to track terms that I don't know. And so it was always like learning something. And I was thinking it is just me. And it took me many years when I think I had done the social analytics team, and our analytics was part of the finance organization. They had moved some reorg. And so I was taken to our CFO to make a presentation about social analytics. What are we doing? And so I gave this presentation, and the CFO looked at it and said, so you're telling me that all these are traffic channels, and it gets multiplied in social channels in this way, and we get new traffic and referrals, blah, blah, blah. And he had a very different way of looking at it. I'm looking at him thinking, how is his brain wired, and how he's talking about what I am talking so differently. That was a fascination. So for the longest time, again, I thought it was about different people making interpretation. So when I'm dealing with different stakeholders, I thought that's how they were doing it. And one interesting thing that happened with the CFO meeting was a turning point for me. My CFO basically said, so you're saying if we take all these people who are working on social and move them around to do something else, we would basically lose so many $1 million. And at that time, eBay was a $70 billion business. And so few millions, whatever millions, didn't matter much. And I said, yeah, but it's not just about the conversion. They are bringing new customers and blah, blah, blah. And he heard me. He went and reorged the business. And the logic was that social should not be this standalone, isolated thing because it is making less money from his perspective, dealing with billions. It needs to be embedded as part of the business. From a micro level, it means different people got moved around. Reorg is always stressful in companies. And then they ended up being part of different orgs where they were successful in bringing social, and they were successful in bringing, more money to the company overall. But for me, it was a shock. But the next thing that happened because of that is I lost my job, right? Because I was head of this whole unit, and now that unit got reorg. And so my boss basically told me, okay, I'm going to, give you an opportunity to go figure out what you want to do next. But you're not going to just sit idle and do this. So he got me into a role to be in the office of the president for 1 year as a special role. And he said, what you brought as transparency about how social worked, give us the same business lens. What are the business drivers for the entire business? And can you do that? We started talking about it, and within a week he says, okay, I'm actually going into a meeting and I'm going to commit that you're going to give us a scorecard in 3 weeks time. Is that doable? What resources do you need? And so I ended up building a different kind of organization this time, who were more program management background people, working with 64 different analytics organizations in the company to create the scorecard for the company. So essentially, this created transparency on all the metrics and business drivers for the business, and then operationalize that to tie back to create reporting, which analytics was anyway doing. I went through that exercise and I hired people and did that. It went on for a year's time. And during that time is when mobile was picking up. I found that, that I could go do something, and I ended up creating a mobile analytics org, which is a different story. But coming back to complexity, I would meet with my boss and I would say, this is what we are doing. This is what I'm seeing from this other function, or this is happening in Europe and whatever, right? We would discuss about how we were making sense of this. And it's not just getting scorecard and analytics dashboards, but operationalizing this to get buy-in from different stakeholders to make this their way of living. which means getting the company to a very data-driven thinking. As I was dealing with that, one day, my boss basically said, I did not know you had this capacity for complexity, for dealing with so much complexity. So I'm going to give you more. So then he would introduce me to somebody else. So I would take on another realm of this problem. I did not even think about it as complexity. And it was a compliment. And it kind of tugged in at the back of my head, went running to do my thing. Later on, I did the mobile analytics, and this was another complex ecosystem I had to deal with because it was $27 billion. And then I took a sabbatical saying I'm going to write a book, and came to do, focused on IoT because I was excited about it. That is when it hit me that my real superpower is I get attracted to chaos. and I like things that are complex because I like solving problems. I like solving problems that involves a lot of people and data. Not just data sitting and doing it, or not just people because I have people skills, but the combination of it is kind of my sweet spot. And I realize it helps me, it gives more problems. Focusing and making sense of it is what is joyful for me. And of course, I bring in more people. I thrive in that whole combined brain power, and that makes me smart. So I'm always trying. It naturally brings me to new rooms where I'm surrounded by people who are smarter than me all the time. That's why I'm having a conversation with you, Chris. That's how we met in the first place.
Well, definitely. After all this introduction from my side, it's impossible for me to claim ever that I'm smarter than you. But I think this story was really fascinating. Thanks a lot for sharing. I do believe that nowadays, the interconnectivity that is everywhere, everything we do, any job we do, we need to have that skill, and we need to learn more how to deal with complexity, because data and people, there are more and more and more, and they grow constantly. So I think the story you told us, I think it's also interesting to show that if you gain that skill, the potential, the things that you can do. I would like to move our conversation more towards how can make use of these superpowers. Because I completely agree, these are superpowers. Even if dangerous, as you showed, as all the superpowers, you need to learn how to master them. You have a very interesting career. You did many things. You worked in startups, you work in large companies, you're an influencer, you've wrote books, you have now a learning community. So you have seen innovation in many shapes and forms, and as you told us. So what do you think are the patterns that enable innovation? Okay, what are the typical characteristics that you see and you say, okay, that this is what I need to build to make innovation happen and to let innovation grow and let creations happen?
So I think there is a creative element to it. When we're thinking about technology, people think it's logic and it has to be done a certain way. But I believe the people who are actually shaping this innovation ground up, in every company. Think about this. Companies who are building new technologies obviously are creating new things. But every company that is adopting that, every single pilot, when you're dealing with a new vendor and saying, hey, I could bring this and I could apply it in a certain way, and think about it, you are being creative. So I think changing the status quo, wanting that change, wanting to drive change is a very important characteristic of that. Curiosity to learn about something that didn't exist before, and to say, I don't know it, but not feel intimidated. You're going to feel intimidated a little bit on the inside, but still venturing to go learn that is another skill. So, in management books and writing, we hear about, constant learning, but that's what it is. You need to be this lifelong learner. And technology industry is shifting so much, and technology is so pervasive in impacting every other industry, that's forcing all of us to be constant learners. So, which is a good thing. So that is that's the second characteristic. The third thing is, I would say, is some people who bring in innovation, who are successful in this, do this naturally. And I believe this is a learned skill, is connecting the dots, learning to connect the dots. So when you get started in your career early on, you might just feel that restlessness, wanting to learn something and figuring it out, and might not realize that you were actually this change agent and driving change. But later on, once you start building experience, anytime you learn something as an adult learner, you're going to always make a translation and say, so when I'm talking to somebody about autonomous vehicles, and I'm saying autonomous vehicle is the business space, and it's evolving as an ecosystem which is impacting all other industries, and it is very data driven. The person who's hearing, they might not be from automotive at all. In fact, many of my students are not from automotive industry, though I have a few from there. There are some people who are in NVIDIA, who are in technology industry. There are some people in retail and other places. There are some people who are not in any of these, who just want to get into the space. They are going to hear that and say, she's talking about this data. She's talking about creating business models. She's talking about connectivity. And, I can see the parallel of what we did. Or you're trying to solve a business problem and you see a parallel of, I have solved a similar business problem in a totally different domain. And so my classes are fun for me, definitely, and hopefully, for my students, because they keep coming back, because we drive the discussion. We have a discussion with very pluralistic view. And so the third piece is connecting the dot, which you can do naturally. If you just attempt to go learn anything new, you would feel intimidated and your creative juices will flow if you start thinking about, okay, where can I apply this? But as soon as you make that connection to your own learning, saying, okay, I've seen similar thing in retail. I've seen this kind of resistance to change in my industry, in oil and gas. It doesn't matter which industry. Or in a different role. I have many people who want to become product managers, and they were not product managers. They were doing something else. And so they say, but how do I productize something? And they expect a theory behind it. There must be theory somewhere, but it is them bringing that experience, bringing a customer-centered focus and enabling building of something so that it can scale. So, but there are elements of it that they know, which was not in that same language. So I tell my students, you have to do these things, but you need to learn to speak the lingo that industry will understand. That's the hardest part that you need to practice, and you need to get buy-in to make that career pivot.
I think there is a lot of misconceptions around one, trying to simplify things, which is wrong. I think you need to embrace this complexity, and through the tools you just explained, everybody can manage it and get something new out of it and create value out of it. But I also like the fact that you say you don't need to be afraid. You're going to face a moment, might feel overwhelmed, but that's fine. No worries, it's normal. I think that's the thing. And that's really interesting point of view, which I couldn't agree more. Related to what you said, which is really a lot about soft skills, I also want to draw a little bit in your career as a product manager, as a data-focused person. So the question is, how can data help you in this journey? And what are the skills that can help you in this journey?
So initially, I think the way I got exposed to data, I came out from being an engineer, coding, dropped that completely, and then I moved to the business side. And then I grew on the business side. So I kind of didn't do coding for a little bit, and I did not do specifically anything that I thought was related to data, but I was kind of using data in my decision making. I realized that people were coming and using data to validate their assumptions, or they were using data to justify the ROI because they wanted to make a certain spend. This was a common pattern. And so I remember when social media picked up, this was in 2007, and Facebook had launched their platform, and Twitter and everybody, I think Pinterest came later, but Google Plus was there. They were all opening up their API platform for social, to call for developers to build on their platforms. We were trying to make sense of this. And I was part of this group of 30 people who were working in different social media function across multiple companies in Silicon Valley. And somebody might be part of marketing, somebody might be part of PR, and somebody was part of product, and different roles, right? And somebody is building this API product as a product side. We used to have this conversation about how companies are resisting change. How do we get buy-in? How do you get budgets? And it was always about data. I think that is when I officially started gravitating towards data. And I realized people are using data to their advantage. And they're using the same data to tell different stories. So there was a fascination, but I had not done anything technically with it. And then I got attracted to, Twitter feeds. In fact, I have a patent on social data mining that I got in while I was in eBay. And I figured out there is so much in the Twitter data that we can make sense of what our customers are doing outside of the company. That's how I was always thinking of it as customers, and they're telling us a story. So for me, data is your communication with the customer. So if you're interacting with the customer, say on a website or mobile, the customer even visiting there is traffic. If you're giving some recommendation and the customer clicks or doesn't click, that click stream is communication from the customer. If the customer doesn't react the way you want them to react, they're communicating that what you're giving them is not relevant for them. And when you're calling customer service, when you're interacting with them, everything is a data point. So essentially, as a customer, we are just a data point for the company. And that hit me one day. I actually have given a talk about this many years back when I got this aha during that time. But coming back to very practical skills. So I was not thinking of it that way. And then I did the Twitter mining and there were social tools and stuff. And then I was like, okay, I need to learn this tool. So because I'm always thinking, I don't know this stuff and I need to learn this. Somebody else knows, but this is interesting. And then I was working as a product manager, social commerce product manager in eBay, trying to bring social to the company. And I needed to make sense of this data. And I said, I don't know to actually figure out how to go build access our analytics systems and do this. And I went to the analytics org and said, give me a person, I need to do, social analytics. And they said, we don't know social analytics. We don't have anybody who does social analytics, but we know people who know SQL and Teradata and all our access our complex customer systems. We can give you an analyst and can you train them in social? And I said, yes. And then I said, I need the next person. And so it kind of evolved from there. And I would give credit to every single person who's worked with me because they are brilliant. And when I teach them social and they bring their skill of knowing to do SQL, it is not just a tactical transaction, but they hear what I want to achieve with this. And they say, why don't we do it this other way? And then it kind of builds up into something else. In fact, I did a capstone project with Carnegie Mellon University at that point because they had a social data lab. And they gave me these students from college who were part of the lab. And I said, I need somebody with fresh thinking who understands social data. And they just brought fresh perspective. I ended up hiring somebody from there later on. So there were all these different dimensions to data. And that's how I got into this whole data world. And eventually, the analytics VP who was talking to me saying, let's do budget planning for next year and say, what's your plan? What's your pipeline? How many analysts do you need? Heard me. And I said, this is my grand plan of what social can do for this company. And this is what I want to do. Basically, he said, I can't keep giving you one off analyst. Looks like what you're thinking is really big. Would you come and build social analytics as a function? So I ended up moving to an analytics org, not in my identity thinking of myself as a product person, but I was going to build a data org to go manage that. Once I went in that, again, this is smart analysts and I'm, one of them. And they were all these analytics leaders who were responsible for different aspects of the business. I was always focused on, okay, who's my customer? What value are we bringing? Who are my internal stakeholders? So this is some lesson that I have to quote Sai Alavarpu. He's exec in the IoT AI space, who worded it very beautifully. So credit to him. But I got the aha of it. I'm just quoting him on how he articulated it beautifully. The company has to be ready. The management has to be ready for change of whatever innovation you're bringing. And you need to give them in bite size, or you need to educate them to that place. So I cannot suddenly walk into the company and go to our CEO and say, we're going to be a data-driven company, or we are going to bring social media and this is going to change the world in a certain way. They're not there. So we need to educate them. And data serves that purpose. So for me, data was just a tool and it told a story. Data can tell any story. And so I do two things. I use data to tell the story, to drive my ROI, to get my budget, which is what everybody was doing with me, throughout my career. The second thing is, I know the customer is communicating with data. So whatever my use of data, I stop and listen. So when I started to teach at Stanford Continuing Studies, and I teach AV course and AI course, and I had my students come in and say, we need more courses. Because we are business users, we don't get enough of these courses telling us, how to apply technology and learn this stuff. And I started this thing called Driverless World School. I said, okay, it makes sense. Looks like there's value, but I don't want to assume there is a big enough market, whether there is enough of a community. Am I talking to myself, or is there like 10 people ready to talk to me? Are there like 1,000 people ready to talk to me? So I tune in and I listen. And everything I do, I'm very data driven. I listen to every single interaction as my customers telling me. So I think feedback is a gift it comes in the form of data. So to summarize, I would say, You can use data as a tool to tell your story, to drive your ROI, which means you're drawing insights in a very biased way, which an analyst would hate because that is not the right insight that the data is saying. But that's how it is used on the business side many times. And then to do whatever you want to do successfully, listen to what the customer is saying. What is the insight? So I am very paranoid when I see like a correlation it is saying. I would go and say, is this really causal? And if it is not, wow, what am I seeing? What are the other noise in the system? And how do you make sense of that?
There is a lot in what you just said. And I find interesting, especially one of the things you said at the end. In a way, you're implying what is known if you're an expert in data and statistician, which is like, okay, correlation is not causation. When you find it, you want to know more and you really need to be sure. But there is an element there which is not often talked about. What's the real impact of AI? Because a lot of the things you said comes naturally from a person of an engineering background or a scientific background that goes into business. But for many business people that are making business, those skills are not natural. So what's the actual real adoption of AI? And then is it really that easy? And what can it be done to do it in the right way? Because it can also be misused. It's a powerful tool.
So bringing AI innovation to the company. So while I was teaching autonomous vehicle business, and it was centered on data, basically getting the car connected and moving that data out into the cloud and then solving problems for various customers, could be consumers, could be dealers. We always start with the customer problem, and data is just an enabler. It naturally led me towards AI. And it could be that I led analytics organizations, so I kind of gravitate towards data, but it was more AI. And so now that forced me to kind of think about this beyond autonomous vehicles and say, okay, how do I teach people to make sense of AI and understand their roles? And one pattern I've seen, Chris, I'm digressing from your innovation question, but I will come back to that. One pattern I have seen is in industry, every time there is an innovation, it starts with the technologist building something, right? There's a wave. But then it becomes real only when the business person comes in and it impacts the customer, it impacts the business in some form, and there are real jobs that's created along the way. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. And so I find that to drive innovation in a company or a business or an industry, it has to create jobs, not VC jobs from the startups that it is creating, but real jobs. So at a macro level, if you're thinking, is AI hype or is it real? Look at whether it is creating jobs, it's creating transformation. And you don't need to go very far. My students come back for all my classes. That's usually my community. But I also have some new people come in and say, hey, I want to get into this AI thing and I'm seeing things happening in my company. Where do I get started from? I usually tell them, you don't need to go very far away. Look at what you're doing, whatever your job is. Somebody could be in customer support. Somebody could be doing program management. They're not technologists. Typically, or if they're technologists, they're interested in the business side. So that's kind of my audience. Or there are business development people saying, hey, we have to do deals. There's lawyers I've spoken to. I've taught classes where they said, hey, we have acquisitions happening in our company. This company acquired has some AI in it, and I have to make sense of the risk and the liability that comes with it. So it comes at various dimensions. So the thing you have to do is, with AI specifically, you just look in your own company, in your own industry that you're comfortable. I have students who look in their city because they want to solve a problem. So I usually say you get very passionate at a micro level for a user who wants to career pivot. You have 3 paths to go. One, you're very fascinated about technology and you say, oh my God, computer vision can do this, or facial recognition is doing this, and good and bad, right? You get fascinated about it, you teach yourself more about it, and you go towards that. Or you say, hey, I hear at a distant level about facial recognition, and they're using that as ID to letting people in to move around in the airport. You can say, hey, how does this impact my industry? And you think about your domain that you've built all your life, and you start thinking, and that get your creative juices flowing on how that you can bring that to your industry. What problems can you solve? The third thing is you're just passionate about solving a problem. So I've had people who had autistic children and they wanted to kind of do something to make their life easy. I had one student who came to my AV class because he wanted to make sure that bicycles while they're driving in the school zones are safe when cars are driving. And he said, and then when this becomes autonomous, we can't even wave to the other car to make it stop. And how do you deal with this? And he was working with the city to get the right ordinance, but he says, can I do something with IoT, or is there something I can do with AV? Different ways of doing it. And so you either look at a technology you become passionate about and you run with it. You hear anything in news and say, how does this impact my industry? And you focus on your industry and your domain, and which is your comfort zone. Or you basically go and say, if you have a problem that you want to solve, that you're passionate about, that's gnawing at you, then you kind of focus there and say, can this technology help me? And then that's the best way, because the technology is just an enabler. At a macro level, I'll say, if you're bringing innovation to a company, now AI is entering the company from every possible direction. It's not like the management is thinking and it is coming top down. It is not just technologies are building, or data scientist has built something and now you have to bring that to the business side, which typically happens in the technology industry. But this could be in any department, in any direction. So it's kind of permeating from every direction. So there I would again say, think about it as, okay, this looks interesting and I want to bring AI to my company. If you believe that way, you're going to face resistance from middle management. That is just a given, because there are people who resist change because they're comfortable with their jobs and what they're used to doing. So that's a given. You have to expect that. The way you drive the conversation is you think about, is it going to bring new money? Is it bringing new revenue? Then you think about use cases of how it is bringing new revenue. Or is it going to reduce cost? And so you could create some operational efficiency, and you think about how AI is going to do that. Or you can look at what else is happening in industry, and is there a whole new way of doing business? That's the disruption piece. Not everybody is comfortable with that. But if that's your cup of tea, then you can say, hey, we can do this way. So in eBay, we were this online shop selling, auction and new things, new stuff like Amazon, but we also had an auction business. That is what we were. We were a retail online business. And then somebody in there said, hey, we want to do local delivery, which is now a given. Everybody in the pandemic is delivering stuff. And there was a unit that came in and said that. And that was so out there. That's a very disruptive thinking, saying we need to deliver items to people in their little neighborhood. And to make that happen, what kind of partnerships do we need? What kind of technology do we need? So in the AV industry, when Ubers and Lyft and BlaBlaCars are bringing this whole rideshare model, that is impacting autonomous vehicle, because that's going to become a business model for autonomous vehicle. The car makers, the OEMs are looking at it saying, we are not autonomous, we are not electric, we don't have connected cars. And now they all have connected cars, but at that point early on, they didn't have connected cars. But they looked at it and say, hey, if rideshare is going to happen, we are going to sell less cars. This is going to impact our industry. So that's a disruption for them. So at a macro level, you can sit inside the company and you can think about it as, can I bring this technology and it will bring new money? Will it reduce cost and save money? Or is there an interesting new way of doing business? Then let me pilot it. Let me get my proof. Let me get data to prove my ROI, what I was saying, to tell your story. Then bubble up, go educate your management, and then go make it happen. And if you have results that you can show with the first customer who's showing that they're impacted in some form, or you're able to see that you're able to reduce cost or bring money in some form. So don't start with the ROI as just dollars. Just think of the change that will drive some efficiency in the company. Then you can tell a story and you can get your buy-in, and then you can bring AI to the company.
I think there is a lot of food for thoughts here. I think definitely the reality is a combination of the options that you mentioned. And I think these are valuable for anybody. And I think that's the point, because a lot of business people in a lot of real businesses, they want to be able to exploit data, but it's not that easy in a way. And they need this sort of support to go in the right direction. So let's talk about the ethics and how to use data in the right way, which I think it's becoming more and more relevant. And I think there are two sides of that. There is the consumer side, of course, but there is the business side. Okay, you have a responsibility towards your customer. And how can you make sure this responsibility is well responded? Because that's not always the case. And it's important to have that in mind.
So the way I got into AI ethics is I was teaching about AI, I was teaching about AV, and then I started seeing the the ramifications of this from a fairness point of view. And I felt responsible to teach ethics. So I just had it as a module. So now I'm actually teaching AI ethics at Barcelona Technology School to the master's program and to 3 different master's programs. And it's a very interesting exercise because it is not just about, hey, AI can do all these bad things. You need to watch out. We need to teach people about their responsibility when we are getting them excited about the power of what they are going to build. So that is what I've set out to do. So when I'm teaching people about autonomous vehicle and how it can change the world and what kind of business models they can bring in, I have a discussion about the ethics of it. Would you be able to sleep well if you build something and it becomes this other monster in the future? Because technology is a double-edged sword. So whatever you build, you can always have the other side to it. And so from a tactical perspective, I break it down and say, okay, when I talk to the UX design, masters in UX design team, I tell them, hey, you're going to create an AI and think of the future. I'm in this technology futurist, so I'm always bringing you to the future. You're going to have a world of robots and drones. And as designers, you have the responsibility to bring personality to it. Only we tend to, attach our emotions to devices and, give it names and, get attached even to our mobile phones. So when we have voice assistants and talking to us, they are all given some female name or male name. I don't think it's done with any logic or malice, but people come with bias, so that bias is baked in it. And so think about how you're genderizing it. How do you humanize it? I have a book called AIX, and I have a framework about AIX that I teach. How do you do machine learning UX, which is ML UX, or how do you do voice UX, and things like that, specific for specific AI. So that is one aspect. The other thing is data itself is so powerful, and as I said, data can tell many stories, and so people are bringing data to feed the AI to train it. And so it's going to be biased at every stage of the way. So the easiest example that people see outside is they see about how AI is biased towards one population. Enough Black people are not represented in the data, so it doesn't identify them. My voice assistant, which I pay for as a customer, doesn't understand my accent sometimes, and I'm the customer. So they cannot get away with being biased about it. And, I might adapt to speak a certain way for a little bit, but it takes my agency away when I'm in a shared space. So we need to think about this. When I say we, I'm talking about people who are designing and building and as technologists need to think about this, about what they are unleashing into the world. Companies are beginning to hire anthropologists and psychologists to make people think about it in that dimension. The other thing is, the data sets that is out in public is biased. So if you're a technology person and an analyst or data scientist, you just know to look at data. There are tools and techniques of how you can make sense of it, and we need all kinds of thinking to come in to remove that bias. And the third piece is, I would say, it's not just about the data, it's not just about the design, it's about how you deploy this as a business. So there's a third master's in Barcelona Technology School called Masters in Digital Transformation Leadership. And these are future business leaders. So when I have a conversation with them, I actually look at ethical decisions companies are making today or they're not making today and drive case studies to make them think about it. As a person who is involved as a business person, data person, or a technologist, we each have responsibility to do this right, or we are contributing to create a monster. So we need to think about it, especially people like me who are teaching about it, are trying to show the power and the responsibility that comes with it. As a business person, we need to stop and think, what are we doing? And when we are trying to create a business model, are we being ethical about this? Because it might not look a big deal because it's all buried somewhere, but data is always transparent and it will all come out. So can you live with that in the future if it's going to go do something else? It's going to create surveillance for the world, or it's going to, target certain communities, or it's going to take the agency of whole population of people. Do you want to be responsible for that? I would say we have come to a place where AI ethicist is becoming a very hot job. And there are many people from various different roles who are coming and connecting the dots. and getting involved to make that happen. So there is explainable AI, which is a bit more technical to actually show how the brain of the algorithm is working, how it is making decision. There's responsible AI, which is more developing a framework of doing this right inside the company. And every company is now thinking about AI more as a business imperative. And if I don't do it, it's going to create business risk. It is going to cost them later on. That's how I would say think about AI. If you have a moral compass and think about it, it's fine. If you're just curious, creative person, just think about your responsibility. If you're a business person, think about, hey, if I ignore this now, what will be the cost of this decision in a future date?
Thanks a lot, Sudha. It shows you really deeply thought about that, which is not obvious these days. The other thing, which might be, I don't know if naive or very silly, I definitely see of your explanation about how to approach AI is that it can be easily generalized. There are so many other technologies and things we do that we really want to think about what are the impacts for the others. And I think that comes natural when you start from some of the previous discussions we had, when you have a focus on the customer and the value you create. At the end, you need to be deeply empathic with the customer, and you don't want to harm them. And as you mentioned, sometimes there is no malice, you just mess up, and there is a journey there. Sometimes probably we can say there is a little bit of malice, at least, or more than a little bit. And that's where maybe some companies should work more on this topic, but that's not the topic of today's conversation. I think all the discussion we had so far has been really interesting, and definitely me and all the listeners having a very broad idea of what does it mean to write complexity. And sometimes I have this metaphor when it comes to innovation and technology that is really a lot like surfing, even if personally I'm not a surfer, but at least how it looks like, where you constantly have to spot what's the right next way you have to ride. And it's a mix of an art and science. Data can help you can understand, but then when you're there and you're swimming, you need to get it right and you just learn how to do it. And I think that's really a very human skill. And that's what personally makes it fascinating. And what you showed us so far, a good way to see, I believe, how you can spot those waves and how you can think about those. And I'm really amazed by the passion that you bring when you tell your stories, which is a lot, I believe, of your impact. I would like to close this conversation today with a question that I think it's important. We kind of already discussed it, but I'd like you to think more from a point of view of really closing this conversation. And it is, what do you think are the characteristics of a modern leader? And what do you think we have to focus on to really be able to become a good surfer?
We live in very interesting times where we don't need to see complexity. There's complexity all around us. And when we're talking about technology innovation, earlier technology used to come in within one industry and it will disrupt that industry. Now, any technology, you take AI or blockchain or autonomous vehicles, general data, all of them create cascade of disruptions. So it is not, as a leader, you cannot just sit and say, I'm in retail industry, or I'm in oil and gas, or I'm in B2B segment, or you cannot just silo yourself to think about it in one industry, because there could be a wave that could come from a different industry that could hit us. So, and it also interesting times to be a leader today, because there is interesting problems to solve. So the one thing I would say is to be focused on people, your people who work for you, who are the leaders you're grooming inside your company, and your customers. So if you focus on people, that I find solves 80% of the problem and opens new opportunities for you. The other thing I would say is, naturally, we are inundated by so much information. And so we are developing that in our DNA to make sense of that, right? So we don't need to say, hey, how do I make sense of complexity and how do I deal with this? And it's just, even if you look for news and you hear anything, you're trying to make sense of it. There's so many sources and you have to figure it. So we are becoming native citizens in dealing with data and just information overload. The leader skill should be to pull back, not make quick judgments from whatever has been given to them, right, fed to them in their channels, because there's too much information and too much coming from all dimensions. And so one I would say is to pull back. First is focus on people. That's a winner. The second is to not jump to conclusion, to be open, to be mentally ready to feel uncomfortable that you don't have the answers. Things look complex and chaotic. To embrace that chaos is what I would say. To pull back, embrace that chaos, and try to get answers. So that's the second thing. And the third thing I would say is, it's so joyful to solve for these problems. So try to keep learning, to figure out, what does this mean? What is the opportunity? Be curious. And being curious is easier to say than to be curious as a leader, right? If you're curious and you don't know the answer and you're asking dumb questions, you might feel like, you're being judged. So what? Because once you have the answer, you're not going to be dumb anymore. So it takes a certain amount of vulnerability. So I would say be curious, but be vulnerable enough to be open that you're curious. So it's not like you're curious, you're keeping a straight face and go home and go surf and go, learn something new. To be open about your curiosity, to expose that ignorance, and to be vulnerable, I think is going to be the superpower of the future leader. And I want to add in one thing, this is kind of my bias, but we did not have enough women leaders. We have less women in upper management in all the different places. And we're breaking that barrier, and we are seeing more and more women rising up. Women naturally bring that because of the way we grow in industry where we have to face different ceilings. I think we have a certain vulnerability and we expose that vulnerability. We are kind of constantly learning and trying to excel in everything, because if you're the only women in the room, you want to be the best because you're going to be judged. So I think we are seeing that traits of the modern leader. If you want to see, you can look at evolving women leaders, because they naturally bring that. So I think that's going to change the way the world was about winning. It was about, so with more women leaders coming up these days, the world is shifting from winner takes all to a win-win attitude. And I think that is naturally evolving, but I think the modern leader needs to embrace that, saying, okay, we can all win, we can collaborate, we can build partnerships across the disruptions that's coming across multiple industries, and embrace people with different kind of thinking, diversity of thinking, that are going to help, bring the new wave of technology and innovation to the business. And just be vulnerable about your curiosity to keep learning. So that's actually a beautiful place to be in, and a winning place too.
Sudha, it's really amazing what you just said. I love that. I can see a pattern here. Also in this podcast, talking about openness, being able to be vulnerable and being able to build bridges and create collaboration. Thanks a lot for sharing these words. The discussion has been amazing. Hopefully, we might be able to continue another time and more things to discuss. For now, thank you very much for this time with us.
Thank you so much. I had so much fun, and I look forward to follow-ups and continued conversations, and to see the amazing innovations that your audience is going to go make happen in the world. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks a lot for listening to this episode of Engines of Creation. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you haven't already, please hit the follow button. And don't forget to share it with friends, families, colleagues, and anybody you think can be interested to Engines of Creation. That's all for today, and I hope to see you soon.